The auctioneer's gavel struck the wooden block with a deafening crack that silenced the raucous crowd gathered in the dusty square of Sierra Vista, Arizona territory. It was 1878, and human dignity was still something that could be bought and sold in certain shadowy corners of the American frontier. Sold! All three Fontaine sisters to the gentleman in the back for the sum of $2,000. Lucinda Fontaine, the eldest at 22, stood rigid on the crude wooden platform, her fingers interlaced with those of her sisters Lillian, 20, and Loretta, 18. Their father's debts had brought them here, their mother's recent passing had left them unprotected, and now their futures hung in the balance as they faced the crowd of leering men who had come to bid on them as though they were prized cattle. "Don't let go," Lucinda whispered to her sisters, her voice barely audible over the murmurs of disappointment from unsuccessful bidders. The sisters clung to one another, the only family each had left in the world. Through the sea of weathered faces and dusty hats, Lucinda searched for their buyer. The crowd parted, and a tall man with broad shoulders and a grim expression stepped forward. Unlike the others, he wasn't smiling or laughing. His eyes, a startling blue against his sun-bronzed skin, met hers without a trace of triumph or possession. "The name's Isaac Prescott," he said simply, approaching the platform. "Let's get you ladies out of here." The auctioneer, a wiry man with yellowed teeth and alcohol on his breath, held out his hand. "Money first, Prescott. You know the rules." Isaac reached into his coat and withdrew a leather pouch. The weight of it represented years of hard work, dreams of his own ranch, security for his future, all sacrificed in this moment. He passed it to the auctioneer without hesitation. "Count it," Isaac said firmly, $2,000, as agreed. The sisters watched in silent terror as the transaction that would determine their fate was completed. Lucinda's mind raced with possibilities, none of them pleasant. She had heard stories of what happened to women sold at these so-called debt auctions. Whether they were destined for brothels or brutal marriages, the outcome was rarely kind. "What are you planning to do with us?" Lillian blurted out, always the most outspoken of the three. Isaac's expression softened slightly. "Get you safely away from here, miss. That's the first order of business." He gestured for them to follow him, and with no better options, the Fontaine sisters stepped down from the auction block. The crowd had already begun to disperse, their entertainment concluded for the day. Some cast envious glances at Isaac, others looked disappointed, but none interfered as he led the women to a waiting wagon at the edge of the square. "I have a place about 10 miles outside of town," he explained, helping each sister into the wagon with surprising gentleness. "You'll be safe there until we figure out what's next for you." Lucinda studied him carefully as he settled into the driver's seat. His hands were calloused, his clothing worn but clean. A cowboy, clearly, but there was something different about him, an air of quiet dignity that set him apart from the other men at the auction. "Why did you buy us?" she asked directly. "What do you want in return?" Isaac's gaze remained fixed on the road ahead as he set the horses in motion. "Nobody should be sold like that. Not cattle, not horses, and certainly not people." "That doesn't answer my question," Lucinda pressed, even as Loretta squeezed her hand in warning. Isaac sighed deeply. "My sister was sold at an auction like that 5 years ago. I never saw her again." His voice was even, but Lucinda could hear the pain beneath the words. "I couldn't save her then, but I can help you now." The sisters exchanged glances, unsure whether to believe him. Men rarely did anything without expecting something in return. This was a lesson their father had taught them well before his gambling debts had claimed his life and their freedom. $2,000 is a lot of money to spend on strangers, Lillian observed. Isaac nodded. "It was every penny I had, been saving for my own spread for almost 10 years. A small, rueful smile touched his lips. "Guess I'll be working for someone else a while longer." As the wagon rumbled out of Sierra Vista, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the desert landscape. Saguaro cacti stood like silent sentinels against the horizon, and the distant mountains shimmered in the heat. For the first time since their father's death 2 months ago, the Fontaine sisters felt something other than dread, a cautious, fragile hope. "What will happen to us now?" Loretta asked softly. At 18, she was the youngest, her innocence somehow preserved despite the hardships they had endured. "That's for you to decide," Isaac replied. "I bought your freedom, not you. Once we're at my place, we can talk about getting you somewhere safe, maybe to relatives back east." Lucinda shook her head. "We have no one. Our mother's family disowned her when she married our father and his relatives." She trailed off, unwilling to speak of the uncles who had been all too eager to sell their nieces to cover their brother's debts. Isaac absorbed this information silently, his jaw tightening. "Well, you can stay with me until you figure things out. I've got a small cabin, but there's a lien to that can be fixed up proper. It's not much, but it's yours as long as you need it." As they traveled farther from town, the sisters began to relax slightly. Loretta dozed against Lillian's shoulder, exhausted from days of uncertainty and fear. Lillian kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, while Lucinda watched Isaac, still trying to understand his motives. "You work at the Blackwater Ranch," she said suddenly, noticing the brand on his saddle. Isaac nodded. "Foreman there for the past 3 years. Old man Jenkins's place? I thought he didn't like having women around his ranch." "He doesn't," Isaac confirmed. "That's why we're going to my cabin, not the main house. Jenkins is a hard man, but he's fair about giving his men their own space on their off time." The sun was setting when they finally turned off the main trail onto a narrower path that wound through a stand of mesquite trees. Beyond them, nestled at the base of a small rise, stood a modest cabin with a corral to one side and a small garden patch out front. "It's not much," Isaac said as he brought the wagon to a stop, "but it's solid and private. No one will bother you here." The cabin was indeed small, one main room with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table with 4 chairs, and a narrow bed in the corner. A door at the back led to the lean Isaac had mentioned, a space currently used for storage. "I'll clear this out," Isaac said, gesturing to the piles of tools and supplies. "Put in a couple of beds for you. I'll take the barn until we get things sorted." Lucinda stared at him, bewilderment evident on her face. "You'd give up your home for us?" Isaac shrugged, suddenly looking uncomfortable under her scrutiny. "Seems like the right thing to do." That night, after a simple meal of beans and bacon that Isaac prepared before retiring to the barn, the sisters huddled together on the bed, speaking in whispers. "Do you trust him?" Lillian asked, her eyes bright in the dim light of the single oil lamp. Lucinda hesitated. "I don't know. But he didn't have to spend everything he had to free us, and he could have." She didn't finish the sentence. They all knew what could have happened. "I think he's a good man," Loretta said softly. "Did you see how gently he treated that horse with the limp? Men who are kind to animals are usually kind to people." "Usually," Lillian echoed, not entirely convinced. "But what do we do now? We can't stay here forever." Lucinda stared at the ceiling, the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. Since their mother's death, she had been the one her sisters looked to for guidance, for protection. And she had failed them, unable to prevent their uncles from selling them to pay off their father's debts. "We need money," she said finally. "Enough to get us to California maybe, or back east where we can find respectable work." "What kind of work can we do?" Loretta asked. "Father never let us learn a trade." It was true. George Fontaine had been determined that his daughters would marry well, not work. Their education had been focused on the social graces, not practical skills. Lucinda could play the piano beautifully, Lillian could recite poetry in 3 languages, and Loretta could create exquisite embroidery, none of which would put food on the table in the Arizona territory. "We'll figure it out," Lucinda promised, though she had no idea how to fulfill that promise. "For now, we should be grateful we're safe." The sisters fell silent, each lost in her own thoughts. Outside, an owl called, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote answered. Strange, unfamiliar sounds to girls who had grown up in town, but somehow comforting in their wildness, a reminder that they were far from the men who had tried to buy them, far from the uncles who had sold them. Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and the smell of coffee. Isaac had already been up for hours, it seemed. When the sisters emerged from the cabin, they found him repairing a broken fence post, his shirt damp with sweat despite the early hour. "There's coffee on the stove and some biscuits," he called, pausing in his work. "Not much, but it'll hold you until I get back from town with proper supplies." Lucinda approached him, smoothing down her wrinkled dress, acutely aware of her disheveled appearance. "Mr. Prescott, we need to discuss our situation." Isaac straightened, wiping his hands on his pants. Isaac is fine." "Isaac, then." She took a deep breath. "My sisters and I are grateful for what you did yesterday, but we can't accept your charity indefinitely. We need to find a way to support ourselves." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "That's fair, but it might take time to figure out what's best. Sierra Vista isn't exactly brimming with opportunities for ladies like yourselves." "We're willing to work," Lucinda assured him. "We may have been raised as gentlewomen, but circumstances have changed. We'll do whatever is necessary." A small smile touched Isaac's lips. "I don't doubt your determination, Miss Fontaine. But let's take things one day at a time. Today, I need to go to town for supplies and to check in with Jenkins. Will you be all right here on your own?" Lucinda nodded, though the thought of being alone in this unfamiliar place sent a flutter of anxiety through her chest. "We'll be fine. And please, call me Lucinda." Isaac's smile widened slightly. "Lucinda, then." He hesitated, then added, "There's a shotgun above the door inside. Do you know how to use it?" She shook her head. Her father had never thought it necessary for his daughters to learn such things. "I'll show you when I get back," Isaac promised, "just in case." After he left, the sisters explored the small homestead. Besides the cabin and barn, there was a chicken coop with half a dozen hens, a vegetable garden that had seen better days, and a small creek running along the property's edge. It was modest but self-sufficient, or it could be, with work. "We could make this place comfortable," Lillian mused, running her fingers along the porch railing. "Clean it up, maybe plant some flowers." Lucinda frowned. "We're not staying, Lil. This is temporary, remember? We can't impose on Isaac's generosity forever." "Where will we go?" Loretta asked, her voice small. "We have no money, no family, no skills that anyone values out here." It was the question that had kept Lucinda awake most of the night, and she still had no answer. She sighed and pushed a strand of hair from her face. "For now, let's make ourselves useful. We can clean the cabin at least. It looks like it hasn't seen a woman's touch in years." The sisters spent the day scrubbing floors, washing windows, and airing out the small cabin. They found a dusty chest in the lean-to with some quilts that, once shaken out and hung in the sun, would make suitable bedding. By mid-afternoon, the main room was transformed still simple, but clean and orderly. They were preparing a meal from the meager supplies in Isaac's pantry when they heard the wagon approaching. Lucinda went to the door, relief washing over her at the sight of Isaac returning safely. She hadn't realized how tense she'd been until that moment. Isaac's eyebrows rose in surprise as he entered the cabin. "Well," he said, looking around at the clean floors and organized shelves, "this is a sight I never thought I'd see." "We wanted to thank you," Lucinda explained. "It's not much, but—" "It's plenty," Isaac interrupted, setting down several packages on the table. "More than I expected. Thank you." He unpacked the supplies he'd brought: flour, sugar, coffee, bacon, beans, and to the sisters' delight, some fabric, needles, and thread. "Thought you might want to make yourselves some new clothes," he said, seeming almost embarrassed by the gesture. "The general store didn't have much selection, but Mrs. Miller helped me pick these out." Lillian ran her fingers over the calico fabric with appreciation. "This is very kind of you," Isaac shrugged. "Just practical. Hard to find work if you can't present yourself properly." Lucinda noticed he'd brought other items as well: a book of poetry that Lillian immediately gravitated toward, some hairpins, and a small jar of honey. You've thought of everything, she said softly. Not everything, Isaac replied, but I'm trying to help you get on your feet. Speaking of which, I asked around town about work. The schoolhouse is looking for a teacher, and the hotel needs a maid and someone to help in the kitchen. Lucinda's heart sank. I don't think any of us is qualified to be a teacher. And as for being a maid, she trailed off, not wanting to sound ungrateful, but unable to hide her dismay at the prospect. Isaac nodded, understanding in his eyes. It's not what you're used to, I know. But honest work is nothing to be ashamed of, and it would give you a start. You're right, Lucinda acknowledged, squaring her shoulders. We'll consider any opportunity. Thank you for asking on our behalf. That evening, after a simple but satisfying meal, Isaac kept his promise to teach Lucinda how to use the shotgun. They stood outside as the sunset painted the desert in hues of gold and crimson, Isaac's hands guiding hers on the weapon. It's got a kick to it, he warned, standing close behind her. Brace it against your shoulder like this. His nearness was distracting, his voice low in her ear as he explained how to load and aim. Lucinda tried to focus on his instructions, not on the warmth of his breath against her neck or the strength in his arms as he demonstrated the proper stance. Now, squeeze the trigger slowly, don't pull it, he advised. She followed his guidance and the shotgun roared, the recoil sending her stumbling back against his chest. His arms steadied her, strong and sure. Sorry, she gasped, her ears ringing from the blast. You did fine, Isaac assured her, stepping back to give her space. It takes practice. Lucinda handed the shotgun back to him, her heart racing from more than just the exertion. I hope I never have to use it. So do I, Isaac agreed solemnly. But out here, it's better to be prepared. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Isaac would leave early for the Blackwater Ranch, returning in the evenings. The sisters continued to improve the cabin, turning the lean-to into a proper sleeping area for themselves. They tended the garden, gathered eggs, and used the supplies Isaac had brought to sew new dresses. A week after their arrival, Isaac returned from work with news. Jenkins is hosting a big dinner for some cattle buyers from back east, he said as they sat around the table for supper. He's looking for help serving and cooking. It would be just for one night, but the pay is good. Lucinda exchanged glances with her sisters. We could do that. When is it? Saturday next, Isaac replied. And there's more. One of the buyers is bringing his wife and daughter. They're staying at the ranch for a few weeks, and Mrs. Jenkins is looking for a companion for the daughter, someone to keep her entertained during their visit. Loretta perked up at this. I could do that. I know all the proper etiquette for entertaining. Isaac nodded, a hint of pride in his eyes. That's what I told Jenkins. He said if you work out well for the dinner, he'll consider it. It was a small opportunity, but it kindled hope in all of them. The evening of the dinner arrived, and the Fontaine sisters dressed in their newly made gowns, simple but neat, their hair arranged as elegantly as possible given their limited resources. Isaac drove them to the Blackwater Ranch, a sprawling property with a main house that, while not luxurious by Eastern standards, was impressive for the Arizona territory. Mrs. Jenkins, a stern woman with sharp eyes, assessed the sisters critically before assigning them their duties. Lucinda was sent to the kitchen to help with preparing and serving food. Lillian was tasked with seeing to the guests' needs at the table, and Loretta was introduced to Miss Catherine Bradford, the daughter of the primary cattle buyer. The evening proved challenging but rewarding. Lucinda's hands blistered from carrying heavy trays and working over hot stoves, but she didn't complain. Lillian charmed the male guests with her quiet elegance and knowledge of literature, sparking conversations that made the dinner lively. And Loretta found an immediate friend in Catherine, a girl of 19 who was delighted to find someone her own age in what she considered this dreadful wilderness. When the dinner concluded, Mrs. Jenkins called the sisters together. You've done well tonight, she admitted, her tone suggesting such praise was rare from her. The guests were pleased with the service, and Mr. Bradford has specifically requested that Miss Loretta continue as his daughter's companion during their stay. Relief washed over Lucinda. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it was a start. "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins. We appreciate the opportunity." "Don't thank me," the woman replied briskly. "Thank Isaac. He vouched for you, and that means something here. He's a good man, the best foreman we've ever had." On the ride back to the cabin, the sisters could hardly contain their excitement. Loretta babbled about Catherine and how they had discovered a mutual love of French novels. Lillian described the interesting conversations she'd had with the Eastern businessmen. And Lucinda, though exhausted, felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. They had earned money tonight, not much, but it was a beginning. Isaac listened to their stories with a small smile, his eyes occasionally meeting Lucinda's in the darkness. "You all did well," he said simply. "I knew you would." Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Loretta spent her days at the main house with Catherine, returning each evening full of stories about the Bradford family and their life in Boston. Lillian secured a position helping the local newspaper editor, her knowledge of language and literature proving valuable in proofing articles and writing small pieces about social events. Lucinda, however, struggled to find her place. She helped Mrs. Jenkins occasionally when extra hands were needed at the ranch, but such work was sporadic. She kept Isaac's cabin in order and tended the garden, but she knew these contributions weren't enough to secure her sister's future. One evening, as she sat on the porch mending one of Isaac's shirts, he joined her, settling into the chair beside hers with a sigh of fatigue. "Long day?" she asked, glancing up from her work. He nodded, stretching his long legs out before him. "Jenkins is pushing to get the herd ready for the drive to the railhead. We'll be leaving in 2 weeks." Lucinda's hand stilled. "Leaving? For how long?" "A month, maybe more." Isaac studied her face in the fading light. "Will you and your sisters be all right here on your own?" She resumed her sewing, focusing intently on the needle's path through the fabric. "Of course. We've been here almost a month now. We can manage." Isaac was silent for a long moment. "Lucinda," he finally said, his voice low and serious, "there's something I need to ask you." Her heart quickened, though she couldn't have explained why. "Yes?" "I've been thinking about what happens when the Bradfords leave. Loretta will lose her position, and while Lillian seems settled at the newspaper, it's not enough to support all 3 of you." "I've been thinking about that too," Lucinda admitted. "I need to find proper work." Isaac shifted in his chair, leaning forward. "There's another option. Jenkins is getting older. He and Mrs. Jenkins have been talking about moving to San Francisco to be near their daughter. They've offered to sell me the foreman's cottage and a small piece of land, enough for a modest ranch of my own." Lucinda's brow furrowed in confusion. "But you spend all your savings on us. How could you afford it?" "Jenkins is offering good terms. He'd take a share of my first few years' profits instead of a full payment up front." Isaac took a deep breath. "The thing is, a man running a ranch alone isn't practical. He needs a wife." The needle pricked Lucinda's finger, and she gasped softly, more from surprise at his words than from the small pain. "Are you proposing to me, Isaac Prescott?" she asked incredulously. He met her gaze steadily. "I'm suggesting a practical arrangement. You need security for yourself and your sisters. I need a partner to help make a go of the ranch. We get along well enough, and over time, who knows, it might grow into something more." Lucinda stared at him, momentarily speechless. It wasn't a declaration of love, far from it, but there was honesty in his offer and a respect that she had rarely encountered in men. "What about my sisters?" she asked finally. "They'd be welcome, of course. The cottage is small but bigger than this cabin, and with Lillian's job in town and whatever work Loretta might find, you'd all contribute to making it a home." Lucinda set aside her mending, needing to move. She stood and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the desert landscape that had become familiar over the past month. When she'd first arrived, she'd seen only harshness and isolation. Now she noticed the beauty in the sunset over the mountains, the resilience of the desert plants, the freedom of the wide open spaces. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. Isaac rose and joined her at the porch railing, careful to maintain a respectful distance. You don't have to answer now. Think about it while I'm gone on the cattle drive. If you decide it's not what you want, I'll understand. I'll still help you and your sisters however I can. His generosity continued to astonish her. Why are you doing all this? You've already sacrificed so much for us strangers, you had no obligation to help. Isaac's gaze turned to the horizon. My father used to say that a man's worth isn't measured by what he owns, but by what he gives. He paused, then added more quietly, and maybe I'm tired of being alone. The simple admission touched Lucinda deeply. She realized that despite his strength and self-sufficiency, Isaac Prescott was as lonely as she had been, perhaps more so, having lived in this isolated place for years with only his work for company. I'll think about it, she promised, and I'll discuss it with my sisters. Whatever decision I make affects them too. Isaac nodded, seemingly satisfied with this response. That's all I ask. The night before, Isaac was to leave for the cattle drive. The sisters prepared a special meal to thank him for his hospitality. Loretta had convinced Catherine Bradford to part with some cherished spices from back east, and Lillian had traded one of her newspaper articles for a bottle of decent wine from the hotel owner. Lucinda spent the day baking bread and roasting a chicken that Isaac had brought home the previous evening. The meal was the most festive they had shared at the cabin, filled with laughter and stories. Even Lillian, usually the most reserved of the sisters, was animated as she recounted gossip from town. Isaac watched them all with a warmth in his eyes that made Lucinda's chest tighten with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. After supper, Lillian and Loretta insisted on clearing the table and washing the dishes, shooing Lucinda and Isaac out onto the porch with the remainder of the wine. They're not exactly subtle, are they? Isaac commented as he settled into his usual chair. Lucinda laughed softly. No, I told them about your proposal or arrangement, I should say. They have opinions. I'd expect nothing less. Care to share those opinions? She sipped her wine, considering. Loretta thinks it's terribly romantic, like something from one of her novels. Lillian is more practical. She sees the advantages, but worries it wouldn't be fair to you. Isaac raised an eyebrow. Not fair to me? How so? She thinks you deserve a wife who loves you, not one who accepts you out of necessity. His expression softened. And what do you think, Lucinda? She gazed into her wineglass, watching the liquid catch the last light of day. I think you're a good man, Isaac Prescott, better than most I've known. And I think that with time, respect can grow into something deeper. He was silent for so long that she finally looked up, finding his eyes on her, intense and searching. Is that a yes? He asked quietly. Lucinda took a deep breath. I'll have an answer when you return from the cattle drive. I need time to be certain, and you deserve certainty from me. Isaac nodded, acceptance in his gaze. Fair enough. He raised his glass slightly. Two decisions made with clear eyes. They touched glasses, and Lucinda felt a sense of peace settle over her. Whatever she decided, she knew Isaac would respect her choice. It was a freedom she had rarely experienced as a woman in this world, and she valued it all the more for its rarity. The morning of Isaac's departure came with a chill in the air, hinting at the approach of autumn. He loaded his saddlebags with provisions the sisters had prepared for him, jerky, biscuits, and a small jar of honey for his coffee. The chickens need feeding twice a day, he reminded Lucinda as he tightened his horse's cinch, and check the garden for ripe vegetables every few days. She nodded, amused by his concern. We'll manage, Isaac. We've been helping with these chores for weeks now. He straightened, looking slightly embarrassed. Of course you will. He trailed off, then reached into his pocket. Here, he said, handing her a small leather pouch. It's not much, but it should see you through until I get back. Lucinda weighed the pouch in her hand, feeling coins inside. This isn't necessary. Humor me, he insisted gently. I'd rest easier knowing you have some funds on hand. She accepted the gift with a nod of thanks, understanding it was important to him. Be careful out there." A small smile touched his lips. "Always am." Before she could respond, he leaned down from his horse and, in a gesture that surprised them both, brushed his lips against her cheek. It was brief and chaste, but Lucinda felt the warmth of it long after he had ridden away to join the other cowboys at the main ranch. The days without Isaac stretched into weeks. The sisters fell into a routine, Loretta continuing her companionship with Catherine Bradford, Lillian working at the newspaper, and Lucinda maintaining the cabin while taking on additional work at the general store in town. The storekeeper's wife had fallen ill, and Lucinda's neat handwriting and ability with numbers made her a valuable assistant. It was during her third week at the store that Lucinda encountered Gus Harper, one of the cowboys who had bid on the sisters at the auction. He swaggered into the store one afternoon, his expression darkening with recognition when he saw her behind the counter. "Well, look who it is," he drawled, approaching the counter with deliberate slowness. "One of Prescott's purchases. How's he dividing his time between the three of you?" Lucinda stiffened, her hand instinctively moving toward the small pistol Mr. Miller kept beneath the counter. "Mr. Prescott is a gentleman," she replied coldly. "Something you clearly know nothing about. Now, do you need to purchase something, or are you just here to waste my time?" Harper's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You've got a sharp tongue for someone in your position. Prescott won't be around forever, you know. When he tires of you and your sisters, you might find yourself wishing you'd been nicer to other interested parties." "Is there a problem here, Miss Fontaine?" Mr. Miller emerged from the storeroom, his expression stern as he took in the scene. Harper forced a smile. "No problem at all. Just catching up with an old acquaintance." Mr. Miller looked unconvinced. "Well, do your catching up elsewhere. Miss Fontaine has work to do, and I don't appreciate customers harassing my staff." With a tip of his hat and a last menacing look at Lucinda, Harper departed. Mr. Miller turned to Lucinda with concern. "Did he bother you? I can have the sheriff speak to him." "It's nothing I can't handle," Lucinda assured him, though her hands trembled slightly as she returned to sorting inventory. That evening, she recounted the incident to her sisters as they prepared supper in Isaac's cabin. "He threatened you?" Lillian was outraged. "We should tell the sheriff." Lucinda sighed, kneading bread dough with more force than necessary. "And say what? That he was rude? That he implied things? The sheriff would laugh us out of his office." "This is why we need to accept Isaac's proposal," Loretta declared, setting plates on the table with decisive clinks. "As his wife, you'd have protection, we all would, as your family." "I'm not going to marry a man just for protection," Lucinda argued, though the encounter with Harper had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. "That's not fair to Isaac." Lillian approached her sister, placing a gentle hand on her arm. "Lou, be honest with yourself. Is that the only reason you'd be marrying him? Because I've seen the way you look at him when you think no one's watching." Lucinda felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I respect him," she admitted. "And yes, I've grown fond of him. But love? I don't know." "Maybe love grows from respect and fondness," Loretta suggested, her romantic nature undimmed by their circumstances. "That's what Mama always said about her and Papa." The mention of their parents brought a moment of shared sadness. Despite his flaws, the gambling that had ultimately led to their current situation, their father had loved their mother deeply, and she him. "I'll decide when Isaac returns," Lucinda said firmly, returning to her bread-making. "Not before." But fate had other plans. 3 days later, a rider from the Blackwater Ranch arrived at the cabin, his expression grim as he dismounted. "Miss Fontaine," he asked, addressing Lucinda, who had come out to greet him. "Yes? What is it? Has something happened?" Fear clutched at her heart. There was trouble on the trail, a stampede. Isaac was injured trying to keep the herd from a ravine. Lucinda's world seemed to tilt. "How badly? Is he—" She couldn't bring herself to finish the question. "He's alive," the cowboy assured her quickly, "but hurt pretty bad. They're bringing him back to the ranch tomorrow. Mrs. Jenkins thought you'd want to know." Relief left her weak-kneed. Thank you. Please tell Mrs. Jenkins we'll be ready to help however we can. After the messenger departed, Lucinda gathered her sisters. I'm going to the main house tomorrow to wait for Isaac. You two can stay here if you prefer. Don't be ridiculous, Lillian said firmly. We're coming with you. Isaac has been kind to all of us. We owe him our support now. The next day dawned gray and cool, a rare overcast sky matching Lucinda's mood as they made their way to the Blackwater Ranch. Mrs. Jenkins received them with unusual warmth, her normally stern demeanor softened by concern for the foreman she clearly valued. The doctor's been sent for from Tucson, she informed them, but it'll be hours yet before he arrives. The men should be back with Isaac by midday. It was nearly 2 o'clock when the wagon bearing Isaac finally arrived. Lucinda's heart clenched at the sight of him pale, unconscious, his right leg splinted and his torso wrapped in bandages stained with blood. Several cowboys carried him carefully into the small foreman's cottage behind the main house, where Mrs. Jenkins had prepared a bed. The doctor arrived an hour later, shooing everyone but Mrs. Jenkins from the cottage while he examined Isaac. When he finally emerged, his expression was cautiously optimistic. He's got 3 broken ribs, a broken leg, and a nasty gash on his side that I've stitched up, he reported. But he's young and strong. With proper care, he should recover. Proper care, Lucinda echoed. What does he need? The doctor eyed her curiously. Are you family? Before Lucinda could respond, Mrs. Jenkins interjected. She's as good as. These are the Fontaine sisters, the ones Isaac used his savings to help. Miss Lucinda here is going to be his wife. Lucinda's eyes widened at this presumption, but she didn't contradict the older woman. If it meant she could help care for Isaac, she would accept the label for now. The doctor nodded, accepting this explanation. Well then, Miss Fontaine, your fiancé is going to need rest, careful monitoring for fever, and regular changing of the bandages on his side. The ribs will heal on their own with time, and the leg needs to be kept immobile for at least 6 weeks. I'll stay with him, Lucinda declared, leaving no room for argument. We'll take turns, Lillian added. Between the 3 of us, he'll have constant care. Ms. Jenkins looked pleased with this arrangement. Good. I'll have your things brought from Isaac's cabin. You can all stay in the guest quarters until he's on his feet again. The next few days were among the most challenging of Lucinda's life. Isaac drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes clear-headed and other times delirious with fever. She bathed his face with cool cloths, changed his bandages, and coaxed him to take broth when he was lucid enough to swallow. On the 4th night, as she sat beside his bed reading by the light of a single lamp, Isaac stirred and opened his eyes, truly focused for the first time since his return. Lucinda? His voice was rough with disuse. She set aside her book immediately, moving closer. I'm here. How are you feeling? He attempted a smile that turned into a grimace. Like I lost an argument with a stampeding herd. That's not far from the truth from what I hear. She helped him take a sip of water. The doctor says you'll recover, but it will take time. Isaac's eyes never left her face. You've been caring for me. It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. My sisters and I have taken turns, but yes, I've been here most often. Why? The simple question caught her off guard. What do you mean, why? You were injured. You needed help. You could have left that to Mrs. Jenkins or the ranch hands. Lucinda busied herself adjusting his blanket. Don't be ridiculous. After everything you've done for us? Besides, she hesitated, then admitted softly, I was worried about you. His hand found hers, his grip weak but deliberate. Have you thought about what we discussed before I left? She met his gaze steadily. I have, and seeing you injured like this has made some things very clear to me. Such as? Such as the fact that the thought of losing you terrifies me in a way I didn't expect. Her voice wavered slightly. And that while I don't know if what I feel is love yet, it's certainly heading in that direction. A slow smile spread across Isaac's face, transforming it despite the pallor of illness. Is that a yes, Lucinda Fontaine? She squeezed his hand gently. It's a yes, Isaac Prescott. When you're well enough to stand, I'll marry you. The weeks of Isaac's recovery brought challenges, but also a deepening of the bond between him and Lucinda. As she tended to his injuries, they really talked about their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Isaac shared stories of his childhood in Missouri, of the sister he had lost, of his journey west in search of a fresh start. Lucinda told him about her mother's gentle guidance, her father's flawed but genuine love, the responsibility she felt toward her sisters. By the time Isaac was able to move around with the aid of crutches, Lucinda knew she had made the right decision. What had begun as a practical arrangement had blossomed into something genuine and precious. Their wedding took place on a crisp October morning, with Isaac still leaning on a cane, but insistent on standing tall beside his bride. The ceremony was small, held in the Blackwater Ranch's main house with only the sisters, the Jenkins, and a few trusted ranch hands in attendance. Lucinda wore a new dress of pale blue cotton, sewn by her and her sisters in the weeks leading up to the wedding. Isaac had managed to order a proper ring from Tucson, a simple gold band that he slid onto her finger with hands that were steady despite his still healing body. I, Isaac Prescott, take you, Lucinda Fontaine, to be my lawful wedded wife, he vowed, his voice clear and sure, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. As Lucinda repeated the same words, she felt a certainty that had been absent from her life for so long. This man, this good, honorable man who had sacrificed so much for her family, would be by her side through whatever challenges lay ahead. The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Isaac's kiss was gentle but filled with promise. The small gathering erupted in cheers, Loretta dabbing at tears of joy while Lillian looked on with approval. That evening, after a celebratory meal, Isaac and Lucinda retired to the foreman's cottage that was now their temporary home until they could establish their own place. Mrs. Jenkins says Jenkins has agreed to the terms we discussed, Isaac told her as they sat before the fire. The cottage, 40 acres, and a small starter herd in exchange for a percentage of profits for 5 years. Lucinda smiled, leaning against his shoulder. Our own ranch. It seems like a dream after everything that's happened. Not just our ranch, Isaac corrected. A home for your sisters, too, for as long as they want it. She looked up at him with love swelling in her heart. Have I told you today how glad I am that you were the highest bidder at that awful auction? His arm tightened around her. It was the best investment I ever made. As winter settled over the Arizona territory, the newly formed Prescott family adjusted to their new reality. Isaac's injuries healed, though the broken leg left him with a slight limp that he insisted did not hamper his ability to work. Lucinda proved to be not only a loving wife, but a capable ranch partner, learning the business aspects quickly and managing their modest household with efficiency. Lillian continued her work at the newspaper, her articles gaining popularity and even drawing attention from publications in Tucson. Loretta, whose friendship with Catherine Bradford had ended when the Eastern family returned home, found her place teaching piano and embroidery to the daughters of Sierra Vista's more prosperous families. Spring brought new beginnings in more ways than one. The small herd increased with the birth of calves, the garden Lucinda had expanded yielded its first crops, and most significant of all, Lucinda discovered she was expecting a child. When she shared the news with Isaac, his joy was boundless. He lifted her gently in his arms, mindful of both her condition and his own still occasionally troublesome leg, and spun her around in the yard of their small ranch house. A baby, he marveled, setting her down and placing a reverent hand on her still flat stomach. Our baby. The awe in his voice brought tears to Lucinda's eyes. Are you pleased then? His answer was a kiss that left no doubt of his feelings. More than pleased. Overjoyed, terrified, grateful. He pressed his forehead to hers. I never thought I'd have this a wife, a child, a family. You've given me more than I dreamed possible." The sisters' reaction to the news was equally enthusiastic. Loretta immediately began planning baby clothes to embroider, while Lillian, ever practical, started researching the best methods of infant care to share with Lucinda. Life on the small Prescott ranch fell into a pleasant rhythm. Isaac worked from dawn till dusk, building their herd and improving the property. Lucinda managed the household accounts and garden, her belly growing rounder as summer approached. Lillian and Loretta divided their time between their work in town and helping at the ranch, their presence bringing laughter and warmth to the home. It was during a scorching July afternoon that trouble returned to their lives. Lucinda, now 7 months pregnant, was alone at the ranch while Isaac had gone to Sierra Vista for supplies, and her sisters were at their respective jobs in town. She was resting in the shade of the porch when the sound of approaching horses drew her attention. 3 riders appeared, and her blood ran cold as she recognized Gus Harper in the lead. The encounter at the general store months ago came rushing back, along with his thinly veiled threats. Lucinda rose as quickly as her condition allowed and moved toward the door, intending to retrieve the shotgun Isaac had taught her to use, but Harper spurred his horse forward, cutting off her retreat. "Afternoon, Mrs. Prescott," he called, his tone mockingly polite. "My, how things have changed for you." She squared her shoulders, one hand protectively covering her swollen belly. "What do you want, Mr. Harper?" He dismounted, his eyes taking in her pregnant state with a smirk. "Just paying a social call. Isaac around?" "He'll be back any minute," she lied, praying it would deter whatever Harper had planned. Harper exchanged glances with his companions, who remained mounted. "Hear that, boys? We'd better make this quick, then." Fear coiled in Lucinda's stomach, but she kept her expression neutral. "Make what quick?" "See, I've been thinking about that auction," Harper drawled, moving closer. "Prescott outbid me fair and square, I'll grant that. But he got 3 women for his money. Seems to me that's excessive, even for a man of his appetites. I figure he might be willing to part with one, especially since he's got a new one on the way." He gestured toward her belly. "You're disgusting," Lucinda spat, anger temporarily overriding her fear. "And delusional if you think Isaac would ever part with any of us or that we would go anywhere with the likes of you." Harper's face darkened. "I don't recall offering you a choice, Mrs. Prescott. Your sister Loretta, the young pretty one, she's in town right now at the Mason place giving piano lessons. My friends here are going to fetch her, and you're going to write a note to your husband explaining that she's decided to accept my generous offer of marriage." Ice seemed to replace the blood in Lucinda's veins. "If you touch my sister, I swear—" "You'll what?" Harper laughed. "In your condition? I don't think you're in any position to make threats." The sound of a hammer being cocked cut through the tension. "But I am." All heads turned to see Lillian standing at the corner of the house, Isaac's shotgun leveled steadily at Harper's chest. Her day at the newspaper had evidently ended early. "Miss Lillian," Harper said, his confidence faltering slightly, "we were just having a conversation with your sister." "I heard enough of your conversation to know exactly what you're planning," Lillian replied coldly. "And I suggest you and your friends leave now, while you still can." Harper's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. One of his companions shifted nervously in his saddle. "She's just a woman. She won't shoot." "Care to test that theory?" Lillian asked, her aim unwavering. "My father taught me to hunt when I was 12. I can hit a deer at 100 yards. You're much closer and considerably larger." It was a bluff. Their father had taught them no such thing, but Harper had no way of knowing that. He hesitated, clearly reconsidering his plan. The standoff might have continued indefinitely if not for the sound of multiple horses approaching at a gallop. Isaac appeared at the head of a group that included the sheriff and 2 deputies, all with weapons drawn. Harper and his companions were disarmed and arrested within minutes, their plan to abduct Loretta thwarted before it could be fully enacted. It transpired that Isaac had encountered one of Harper's friends in town, overheard a suspicious conversation, and alerted the sheriff immediately. That night, with Harper and his accomplices secured in the Sierra Vista jail awaiting transport to Tucson for trial, the Prescott family gathered in their small living room. Loretta, shaken by how close she had come to danger, sat close to her sisters on the sofa. Isaac paced before the fireplace, his limp more pronounced with agitation. "We should have dealt with Harper months ago," he berated himself. "I knew he was trouble after Lucinda told me about that incident at the store." "There was nothing to be done then," Lucinda reminded him gently. "He hadn't actually threatened us directly." "But he has now," Isaac said grimly. "And he'll pay for it. The sheriff says attempted kidnapping will get him at least 5 years in territorial prison." Lillian, who had been unusually quiet since the confrontation, spoke up. "What if it happens again?" "Not Harper specifically, but someone else who thinks they can take what's ours because we're women." It was a fear that had lurked beneath the surface of their new lives, the knowledge that their safety, their very freedom, remained precarious in this harsh frontier world. Isaac stopped pacing and faced them all, his expression resolute. "Then we'll face it together, as a family. But I promise you this, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you are all safe and free to live as you choose." "And we'll do the same for you," Lucinda said softly, reaching for his hand. "That's what family means." The baby arrived in early September, a healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. They named him George, after Lucinda's father, with the middle name Thomas to honor Isaac's father. As Lucinda held her son in the bedroom of their small ranch house, with Isaac beside her and her sisters hovering nearby, she marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From the humiliation of the auction block to this moment of pure joy, it seemed almost miraculous. "He's perfect," Isaac murmured, gently touching his son's tiny hand with a fingertip that the baby promptly gripped with surprising strength. "He is," Lucinda agreed, her heart so full it felt it might burst. "And he's free. He'll never know what it's like to be bought or sold or owned." Isaac's eyes met hers, understanding the depth of meaning behind her words. "None of us will ever know that again," he promised. The years that followed brought both challenges and blessings to the Prescott family. The small ranch prospered under Isaac and Lucinda's careful management, eventually growing to encompass over 200 acres and a respectable herd. Little George was joined by a sister, Margaret, 2 years later, and another brother, William, 2 years after that. Lillian's work at the newspaper eventually led to an offer from a major publication in San Francisco, which she accepted with both excitement and reluctance to leave her sisters. But distance did nothing to diminish the bond between them, and her frequent letters and occasional visits kept her connected to the family. Loretta, to everyone's surprise, fell in love with the new schoolteacher who arrived in Sierra Vista in 1883. Their wedding the following spring was a joyous occasion, and they settled on a piece of land adjacent to the Prescott Ranch, ensuring the sisters remained close. Gus Harper served his time in prison, and upon release had the good sense to leave Arizona Territory entirely. His departure removed the last shadow from the Prescott family's happiness. On the 10th anniversary of the auction that had brought them together, Isaac and Lucinda stood on the porch of their now substantial ranch house, watching their children play in the yard with their cousins Loretta's 2 young sons. "Do you ever regret it?" Lucinda asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "Spending everything you had on 3 strangers that day?" Isaac's arm tightened around her waist. "Not for a single moment. It was the best investment I ever made." "Even though it delayed your dream of having your own ranch by years?" He turned to face her, his blue eyes as clear and honest as they had been on that first day. "Lucinda, don't you understand? You and your sisters, our children, you are the dream. The ranch is just land and cattle. You're what gives it meaning." She reached up to touch his face, still handsome despite the lines that 10 years of sun and wind and laughter had etched there. "I love you, Isaac Prescott, more than I ever thought possible when I agreed to marry you." His kiss was tender, a reaffirmation of all they had built together. "And I love you, Lucinda Prescott. From the moment I saw you standing tall despite everything, I think I knew you were the one I'd been waiting for." As the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, the Prescott family gathered for supper. Around the large table sat the fruits of one man's sacrifice and three sisters' courage, a family bound not by blood alone, but by choice, by love, and by the freedom they had fought to secure. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest treasures come disguised as the heaviest burdens, and that true wealth is measured not in dollars spent, but in the lives touched and the hearts healed along the way. In the years to come, the story would be told and retold in Sierra Vista, how a cowboy had spent his life savings to free three sisters from bondage, only to gain a family and a legacy far more valuable than any fortune. It became a legend of sorts, a testament to the power of compassion in a land often ruled by greed and force. But for Isaac and Lucinda, it was simply their story, the beginning of a love that had grown from respect and gratitude into something deep and unshakable, as enduring as the mountains that stood sentinel over their home, and as vast as the desert sky that stretched above them, limitless with possibility.